Thank you for joining us in today's Connection Point End Times News Briefing podcast as we talk about major events as it relates to Bible prophecy. In today's update, here's a couple items just to bring to your attention. The first item to draw your attention is the U.S. pledges support for a two-state solution to Arab-Israeli conflict. This report came out of the Jerusalem Post, how the Biden administration is committed to a two-state solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, according to U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who told Foreign Affairs Minister of Israel, Gabi, when the two men spoke on Monday night. The Secretary addressed the U.S. approach toward a more peaceful, secure, prosperous future for Israelis, Palestinians, and the greater Middle East, according to his office said. So, again, their push for this two-state solution, which, again, is going to be very difficult for it to happen because the Palestinians will not agree to most of the demands of a two-state solution because they want to take all of Israel versus bits and pieces and the areas that they're already in right now. And, again, there's plenty of land around Israel for them to be a part of. They don't have to be in Israel itself, but that's a whole nother discussion. But we do see this push and this agenda for a two-state solution from the Biden administration. The second item to bring to your attention is the Israelis' northern border could become battleground over Iran's nuclear program. So Iran and the United States are locked face over the Iran nuclear deal, and Israel is caught in the middle. And so Iran says economic sanctions must end before any new talks, but the U.S. says Iran must comply with the 2015 nuclear agreement before sanctions are lifted. This standoff will have a profound impact throughout the Middle East. Iran just raised the stakes. So on Sunday, the head of the UN nuclear watchdog announced that Iran will provide less access to its atomic program. It's a response to a Biden refusal to lift sanctions, which Iran is demanding as a condition to return to the negotiating table. Some warn that if negotiations lead to sanction relief, it will begin a financial chain reaction in the region. If more money will go to the Iran program, it may mean that more will go to Hezbollah in Lebanon. The money would go also to the other proxies in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and bring more instability in general for the Middle East. The Middle East Observer, again, Joe Rosenberg, who's written so many fantastic books. I encourage you to read all his material. Anyways, but he fears negotiations would force Israel to strike first. He goes on to say, he says, you're already seeing Iran showing tremendous aggression. It's increasingly rapid enrichment in uranium, which is now to a high level enrichment, very, very close to bomb-making capacity. He goes on to say, with Biden trying to get back into this nuclear deal, Israel might decide to have to take a preemptive military action against Israel's nuclear facilities. And he goes on to say that it's almost certainty, according to the proxy of Hezbollah, is to fire its 150,000 or so missile and rockets into Israel, which would be devastating. So a war of words has already begun in Israel's northern border. Israel's defense minister declared Lebanon's ground would be tremble if Hezbollah attacked. Meanwhile, Hezbollah chief Nasrallah boasted in his military can hit anywhere in Israel and that Israel wouldn't see anything like it since the founding of the state. Days ago, again, the Israeli Air Force launched an exercise that simulated 3,000 strikes on Hezbollah targets within 24 hours. He goes on to say that the drill was a message to Hezbollah, and he explained that the northern war with Hezbollah would force Israelis into their homes because the rockets would be too dangerous. And so Israel's military believes Hezbollah doesn't want a full-scale war, but in 2006, the Second Lebanon War began with a small ambush, so they know anything can happen. So you see that the tensions continue to mount within the region, and especially with the U.S. wanting to get back into the horrific Iran deal, and Iran is going to supply as they have been Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorist organizations with rockets and missiles and money to help fund their terrorism. So we see the potential outbreak that can happen on a moment's notice there in the surrounding region of Israel. Also, speaking of Israel, this report came out of the Times of Israel talking about the COVID vaccination, how the government launches what they call a green pass for the vaccinated, and they warn about fraudsters could be jailed. So there's this little passport, as we've mentioned, in other countries that are trying to develop these things. So if you've been vaccinated, you got this little pass so you can fly or travel from country to country, or you can go back to work, go back to school. So they're pushing this hard in countries around the world, but it's just this whole agenda that's being developed behind the vaccination as well. But within this particular article is talking about how there is a lot of people that can make stuff up as well. So it's not the legit stuff or passport or QR code. So they're people are trying to beat the system, if you will. But again, it's a whole other subject dealing with the vaccine. Again, we're not going to touch on it right now. Maybe some other time we will talk about it. But again, there's others that have talking about these vaccinations and videos and documentation. Though they have these videos posted online for a period of time, and they get taken down because it goes against the CDC or the World Health Organization. And again, they're just exposing it and telling the truth, but people on the internet and the big tech doesn't want people to know and be informed anyways. So that's something to keep in mind. On to another item and discussion. This is perhaps one of the most destructive legislation that is being pushed and promoted in the U.S. It's called the Equality Act. It's expected to advance in Congress this week, and that really treats people of faith as kind of second-class citizens. So this Equality Act is expected to advance in Congress this week. It's a controversial bill designed to overhaul the nation's civil rights laws to include LGBT Americans, but many worry it will trample on the rights of men and people of faith and the rights of women. And under the Equality Act, disagreement is considered discrimination, even though that's not true, but that's how they view it. It includes gay marriage, biological males competing in women's sports, and doctors performing procedures like gender assignment so that it goes against their conscience. It is a bill President Joe Biden wants to sign in his first 100 days in office. So the equality provides a long overdue federal civil rights protection for LGBT plus communities, Americans, preventing discrimination in housing, education, public services, lending systems. So he's urging Congress to swiftly pass this historic legislation. It's not historic, it's damaging, it's destructive. And, there's so many problems within this particular bill. So it would allow, men to share locker rooms and bathrooms in schools and public places with women. Allows men to compete in women's sports, which, again, just is dumbfounding why they would allow this to happen. It's redefining sexual discrimination. It would provide the measure of abortion on demand, likely in the long-standing prohibition on taxpayer-funded abortions, and remove conscience protection for doctors and nurses, and many other horrific stuff that this particular bill allows. And it goes against every church, against every company and business that stands for morality, and again, it's trying to force this agenda on the American people. And again, many other countries around the world will take note of this as well and try to implement it. But it silences a conservative, it silences the Christian voice in all of this. So it's not an equality act. It doesn't treat people equally, across the board. It's really just pushing the LGBT plus agenda. So again, hopefully it doesn't pass, so Lord willing, that it gets voted down. And again, the American people, so many times, even I remember in California, probably 20 years ago when I first started voting, they would have the whole, gay marriage type agenda on there, and it got voted down over and over. So because so many states and people don't want these bills to be passed, what they end up doing with the Obama administration, they bypassed the will of the people. They went straight to the Supreme Court to force this agenda to pass this particular, bill and made it law. And so, anyways, but this is what happens when you get Democrats in charge. They just destroy the fabric of society with their American, the anti-biblical, anti-God values and vision for the country. The last item to bring your attention, it came out of a report out of the Christian News Now website that talks about a Calvary Chapel church in Maine, emboldened to renew restriction fight after Scotus ruling. So following a pro-church Supreme Court ruling for California earlier this month, the evangelical church in Maine is renewing its fight against the pandemic-related restrictions in that state. So fellow Calvary Chapel in Bangor, led by Pastor Ken Graves, said in its new legal filing a motion for injunctive relief that Democrat Governor Janet Mills has imposed a draconian, unconscionable restrictions on religious worship services while exempting a myriad of secular businesses and gatherings from similar restrictions. So you can see their Democrat are pushing to silence church, not gathering of churches as well. And so you have such harder restrictions on churches than businesses or other social groups. So you see the discrimination against churches is pretty harsh, especially in the Democrat states. When you look at the Democrat-run states, you'll see more problems, more issues than any other comparative state. Independent churches that have been challenging worship restrictions throughout the pandemic. Again, they cite the Scotus ruling on February 5th. That lifted the ban against indoor worship in California. Justice did, however, permit officials to cap gatherings at 25 capacity and banning singing and chanting to prevent the disease spread. Pastor Ken Graves mentions that this forced choice is unconscionable. Maine recently replaced its 50-person limit in indoor gatherings with a guideline that is the same for stores and churches, 50 people maximum or 5 people per 1,000 square feet, whichever is higher. Pastor Ken Graves says that this still limits his congregation to 50 worshipers, but before the pandemic, weekly services drew about 1,200 people. So threatening churchgoers with fines puts them in a scary bind. And so in a country born with the desire to be free and the right to worship fundamentally enshrines in our First Amendment, is forcing such a difficult choice that's unconscionable and frightening. And it shouldn't have to be that way for any church or congregation, to worry about, meeting together and being fined, or you can't meet together, or you can't sing and truly worship the Lord. Church is essential. It helps people within the community. It's spiritually, we need it. Mentally, emotionally, and physically is necessary to meet together as a church, to worship the Lord together. But one of the things that we're seeing through this is the religious freedom under greater attack than ever before. in so many different states, especially the Democrat-run states more than the conservative-run states. And again, that's just part of the makeup of their belief and ideology. Again, we keep bringing this up, but again, that's the reality of what's at stake. So we need to be praying for this situation and circumstances. It is unfortunate when you get the wrong people elected. We will continue to see the horrific decisions and damaging decisions by the left, by the Democrats, people who don't want to actually listen to the data or the science or the medical industry, the woke, the cancel culture, all these are causing more damage, more destruction than people can ever imagine. So as Christians, we need to do all that we can to make a difference, to impact, to get the right people elected, to be informed, to make our voices heard, to be prayer warriors. We are in a spiritual battle, so we need to be equipped and ready and prepared as the battle will get more intense in these end times. So stay watchful, alert, stay in prayer, stay in the Word. Amen. Until next time, God bless.